Can I welcome you as well on behalf of the Observer and myself to this Observer interview with my guest tonight, Chris Huhne. Let's talk about your favourite subject, you. When Saming stood down, you had another go at the leadership, this time contesting it with Nick Clegg. Nick was so angry about some of your conduct of your campaign at one point that it moved him to make a formal complaint that you'd used the politics of innuendo, mounting false challenges and running a campaign that is handing ammunition to the party's opponents. I mean, this was all swirling around the infamous Calamity Clegg document that came out of the Huhne campaign as well. I mean, do you understand why some of your colleagues don't entirely trust you?
Well, I don't think that's got anything to do with the trust issue, frankly. I think that particular document, which I think had fairly wide circulation afterwards, if not before, was literally a collection of quotations. There was nothing else in it. And
with a very interesting headline, Calamity Clegg.
Well, the headline, unfortunately, was put on by the young researcher who pulled together
it was an underling's
all of
fault.
These. Well, as I said at the time, I said immediately when this was, put to me, that I thought that was inappropriate, it was wrong, it was not my choice of words, and it is absolutely not my choice of words. And I don't think that Nick and I would have been able to have the relationship that we have had if Nick thought it was either.
Have you put all your leadership ambitions to rest now?
I'm absolutely confident that Nick will lead the party into the next election.
Yeah, don't give us the stock answer.
And I'm absolutely confident that Nick, who you have to remember is more than 10 years younger than I am, that Nick will be long out seeing my time in active politics.
You'll be well retired. Just before we get to what happened after the election, of course, one of the big events before the last election was the expenses scandal, and like many an MP, you did feature in that. And I suppose you featured most famously for the trouser press. £119, mahogany Corby trouser press from John Lewis.
Really outrageous.
Yes, it was.
There's another example.
Why should the taxpayer be paying for that?
Another example. Well, if you remember what the regime was that if something was required, which because you had two homes, you were allowed to claim. Yeah.
Well, you had a trouser press in both homes, did you?
Absolutely.
You did really?
Absolutely.
Really?
But I freely own up to having claimed £119 on the trouser press, and I freely own up to having repaid the money to the parliamentary authorities.
I want to move on to this next issue through a question suggested by one online questioner, and the question's this. What is the UK national speed limit for a passenger car on a dual carriageway?
70 miles an hour.
How often have you exceeded it?
I have no idea. But one thing, I mean, too many times because I lost my licence and, on cumulative points and tot-up, and clearly lost my licence and therefore too many times. This is a matter which is obviously, I hope, we're going to see after as a result of the Essex Police investigation and the Crown Prosecution Service. I'm delighted to say that there's an official inquiry into all of this stuff, and that I hope that is going to draw a line under it.
Draw a line under it for these good Liberal Democrats here. Did you ask your wife to pretend she was driving when you'd committed the offence?
I've very clearly denied this. I continue very strongly to deny this.
You swear that's not true? Absolutely. You swear to these good... You can look them all in the eye and say that's not true?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've made that absolutely and abundantly clear, and I'm intending to contest that, and the Crown Prosecution Service and the Essex Police know that.
Have you ever asked anyone to pretend they were driving, to cover when you've committed a speeding offence? If you were charged, would you resign from the Cabinet?
Well, we'll have to wait and see, but I don't anticipate that as a likely outcome. I'm hopeful that the Crown Prosecution Service will reach the conclusion that there is not a case to answer.
Do you have any indication from them when they would come to a decision?
No.
And the reason, I mean, many people think all this erupted into the headlines is your breakup with Vicky after 26 years of marriage, which Patrick Winter, your friend, was talking about in the film. She was clearly very, very, very hurt. Do you regret how badly you hurt her? Yes, I do. I mean, frankly, it was an appalling set of circumstances. And in retrospect, I can see that I was running some substantial risks, for example, in what I was doing politically as well.
So in the run-up to the election, I think I was the first front bencher to call for a judicial inquiry into the phone hacking scandal. And of course, the newspaper that put people onto me and broke the story about the affair was the News of the World. Yes. So we'll have to see, in the great span of things, what the conclusions are from all of that. But I personally feel enormously regretful about what I put my family through, about what happened with Vicky, and I entirely understand the stress that she has been caused by all this. She's a very private person. She's not traditionally been out there in public doing lots of things, unlike me, as somebody who opted to be in public life. And I think it's been absolutely dreadful, and I regret that enormously.
Have you apologised to her?
Yes.
Has she accepted your apology?
No.
Do you think she ever will accept your apology?
I don't know. I'm always hopeful that time heals, but...
she's still very angry.
She is still very angry. Yeah.
And you understand that?
I do understand that.
Do you think you deserve it?
I do understand that entirely. I think that, clearly the public process, the very public way in which this broke up, I mean, obviously there are many marriages that break up, 40% of marriages.
But it's always very hard. And as when you say the partner had not opted for this to happen, and it was you, you were the adulterer in the case, they are the one who really suffer a public humiliation.
I entirely accept that.
When do you think she can ever forgive you?
I don't know.
When did David Cameron last make a big speech on the environment?
Well, the reality is that he made a good speech when he came to the department immediately after the election.
Okay, so that's 16 months ago.
But
has he made a big speech on the environment?
He hasn't made a big speech.
Well, that's very interesting, because he's made big speeches on no end of other subjects.
There's been a lot going on, but I can assure you...
But he's found time to do speeches on Islamic extremism in Europe, crime. I mean, isn't the truth that the Conservatives, it was just a marketing ruse, wasn't it? And they're sort of humouring you and Vince, saying, let them do a bit of greenery, but they're not really interested in it, are they?
What is certainly true is that it's an enormous advantage for me as the Energy and Climate Change Secretary that the commitment to environmental issues runs really deep in this party, and everybody
in this party, which is the junior member of the coalition dominated by the Conservatives.
And it is certainly true that it doesn't run through the Conservative Party in quite the same
whenever Tim Montgomery at Conservative Home polls his activists and the people who go on his blog, vast majority say they don't even believe in climate change.
Well, I actually do think that the Prime Minister is committed on this agenda, and I don't think that we would have been as successful as we have been as a department in getting through some really quite tough decisions. For example, the commitment on the fourth carbon budget, which actually sets a commitment to reduction of carbon by half compared with 1990 and the 2023 to 2027 period, long further away than the commitments which we've undertaken through the EU. We wouldn't have had that sort of commitment if there wasn't a recognition that actually this is important for the government as a whole.
How bad would, because although you've stressed your differentiation with the Conservatives more in recent weeks and months, you are all still broadly singing the same song as the Conservatives on the austerity programme. How bad would it have to get before you and Nick and Vince went to see David Cameron and George Osborne and said, get Plan B out of the bottom drawer, because this just is not working?
I think there is a real argument to be had in government, first of all, about trumpeting what we're already doing, which I don't think we're doing effectively enough on things, as I said, like Green Deal and like the electricity market reform.
I'm not saying they're unimportant, but they're marginal in the end as to whether we're going to tip into recession.
No, they're really not marginal. I mean, if you take electricity market reform, we're talking about a level of energy infrastructure investment which is going to replace a quarter of all our existing power stations.
But it's not happening overnight,
and which is
it's not happening overnight.
It's happening over 10 years.
Yeah,
but
well,
I mean,
it's the here and now that's frightening people in this room.
It is double the normal amount of energy investment, and it is macroeconomically significant. So, if you're looking where is the spending, where is the demand going to come from, that is a part of the answer. But I think we've got to be creative and imaginative about bringing forward more spending and being on the front foot about that, without any doubt at all.
But just to be clear, are there no circumstances at all in which you would say to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, we have to rethink the public spending cuts?
Well, remember that we are committed to the target that we have.
Yes.
Is the structural current balance. Sorry to be techie about this, but the structural current balance is, first of all, current. So it's current spending, not capital spending. That's an important distinction. Yeah. And secondly, it is the underlying budget deficit. So if, for example,
growth came in a bit low,
we were to come in low,
yeah,
then in fact the actual deficit could be higher. But
you expect to sell this argument to the voters?
No, I mean, you know, Andrew, this is not an argument we have to sell to the voters, but it is an argument which is very important, because any government and any Chancellor of the Exchequer has two audiences. One is that we clearly have to make sure that we are delivering growth and that there is real economic prosperity on the horizon, that we have some sunlit uplands to aim at, but we also have to make sure that we continue to be out of that economic danger zone. And every Chancellor of the Exchequer has two key audiences, the markets and the voters. And woe betide a Chancellor of the Exchequer who forgets that he's got to address both of those reasons.
Going to like the Tories enough, you do a second term with
them? The fundamental point that I would say going into another election is exactly what we said going into the last election, which is that we are an independent party. It will become clearer and clearer the closer to the next election we are, that we're putting forward ideas which are not part of the coalition agreement for this Parliament, but which are part of what Liberal Democrats would like to see happen in the next Parliament. And we will campaign on those, and depending on the election result, we will attempt to achieve as much of that set of commitments, which will be voted through by conference, as we achieved at the last set of commitments.
Okay. What about Labour? What about Labour? Could you be in a coalition with Labour?
Of course.
Either?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You are going to be asked, you are going to be asked for the next general election, now it's happened, which you would prefer. Which would you prefer?
Well, we said very clearly at the next election, at the last election, we said very clearly...
Well, the biggest party. I know you said that. But in the new circumstances when we've had one, voters might be entitled to know what your opinion was. Well, you might say, we'll go along with what the voters say, but which would you prefer? Mr. Cameron, another term in bed with Mr. Cameron, or let's hop out of bed with Mr. Cameron and jump under the duvet with young Mr. Miliband?
I mean, it sounds sort of interesting, and it sounds a bit like a restoration comedy, actually, the way you're putting it.
Or it sounds like a Lothario.
So Barney Bedhop.
Yes. And, we can pursue this metaphor a long way.
But I don't see it like that. I see it much more as us being an independent party, putting our stall out at the election, and what happens is going to be up to the voters. It's back in a hung parliament. We should do, in my view, what we did in the run-up to the last general election. We put out the stall. We say, we need a stable government. What is going to happen? How are we going to get most of this? Is it going to be from the Labour side, or is it going to be from the Conservative side? And frankly, who you may or may not have a prejudice about doing business with is neither here nor there, because we are an independent party that wants to get as much of our manifesto implemented as we can. And that's a really key part of the experience, the lesson I drew out of the European Parliament. Sometimes you work with the left, sometimes you work with the right, but if you are coherent and united and you know what you want as a party, you're going to be a very effective political force. And I believe this party is a very effective political force and will go on being so.
Okay. Well, I think you'll agree we've covered a lot of ground tonight, ladies and gentlemen, on a wide diversity of issues and topics. It just remains for me to thank you for coming to the Observer interview, and to thank Chris Huhne for being my guest tonight. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.